Hi everybody, happy August and welcome to another story time with Beth. I know that there wasn't a story time in July and I apologize for that. Hi B. Dawson, thanks for joining. There was a conference that I went to, Realm Makers Conference, in the middle of the month, and I severely underestimated how much that would throw off my whole schedule for the month of July. It was amazing and I had a great time, and if you've been on social media, you've probably seen some of my thoughts and pictures from that, so I highly recommend the Realm Makers Conference, but I also learned that big events can throw monkey wrenches into all of your schedule plans. So we are back today, the first week of August. It's close to July, so hopefully this counts. We have been reading The Weaver's Blessing together. For those of you who are just joining, The Weaver's Blessing is a fairy tale about a princess, and I'm just going to read the back of the cover. May this land ever draw its strength from the purity and fortitude of its rulers' hearts. For centuries, Klacken flourished under this blessing spoken by a great magician. Then an evil king invaded and murdered the royal family. The land fell into decay, and all hope was lost, or so it was thought. With the king's hunters sent after her, can Princess Elaine save herself and her country, or will evil destroy all hope? So how this story time works is that every month or so I've been reading several chapters from The Weaver's Blessing, and I read it live on Instagram, and then I upload the video to YouTube for people who weren't able to make it. And today we are going to be finishing The Weaver's Blessing. We got all the way to the end. Where we left off last time, we finished up chapter 21, and Brandon had gone off because he thought that if he stayed, bad things would happen. And the princess wasn't doing well. Elaine was really struggling with her new role as queen. And then Jeremy went off to try to find, well, Elaine just knows he went off. And she ends up collapsing at the end of the chapter. So she's not in a good place. And that is where we pick up with chapter 22. Brandon had found Claire immediately. He had hardened his heart in order to leave Elaine, and had to keep it that way for her safety. But when he saw his sister, he could not help being glad. If he hadn't been hardening himself, though, he would have wept with joy. Claire actually recognized him for the first time since she was 8. "Brandon!" she cried out when she saw him, and her young face lit up with joy. She almost knocked him over with her hug. They took up residence near the family that had watched her for 5 years. Brandon did his best to adapt to raising a 13-year-old girl and adopting a sedentary lifestyle. He started an apprenticeship with the local weaver, and had a knack for the more intricate weaving patterns. To him, following the complex paths of the thread was like following trails in the wild. Everything was going well. Then one day the sun rose weak. A light mist fell all morning and turned into a steady, gentle snowfall by evening. Everyone in the town looked at the sky with concern and spoke in hushed voices. His master dismissed him for home early that day. "Go home and say a prayer," he said quietly. "Something must be wrong with our queen." Fear as cold as an icicle pierced Brandon to the core. Of course, there was something wrong with the land. It must stem from something wrong with its ruler. At home, he could not stop pacing to the window every couple of minutes to see if the weather had changed. "You're going to wear a hole in the ground," Claire teased him. "Be quiet," Brandon snapped at her. He was too worried to notice his tone. Claire paused her knitting and looked up at her brother with sad eyes. "Brandon, it's not like you to be mean," she said with hurt. "Why—" A look of realization dawned on her face. "Oh, when the evil king was in charge and I was, you know—" She could not bring herself to speak of the 5 years of nightmare she had lived. Did you know the queen?" Brandon gave her a tortured look that was answer enough. His sister got up and gave him a hug. "Brandon, I'm so sorry," she said sincerely. "Maybe she's just sick or something. I'm sure she'll be okay." As he was brushing her off, he had to say strong. There was a loud pounding at the door, completely incongruent with the quiet of the day. He marched over and tore it open with more force than necessary to silence the knocker, only to find the last person he expected. "You," he said in shock. "Hello, Brandon," Jeremy said, inviting himself in. "See, I finally learned your name." "About time," Brandon grunted. "You're probably wondering why I'm here." Jeremy ignored his rude comment. "We need to talk. May I?" He gestured to a chair and looked between Brandon and Claire. Brandon still could not fully process what was happening, but Claire spoke up. "Of course." She moved toward the table and pushed its contents to one side. "Make yourself comfortable." She and Jeremy sat, but Brandon remained standing. His sister and Jeremy looked at him, then looked at each other. Brandon refused to give in to their pressure. Jeremy was not welcome. He would not show him courtesy. "Actually," Jeremy continued, "now that I think about it, there isn't much for us to talk about. It's simple, really. I'm taking you back to the castle." He did not say "back to Elaine," but they both knew what he meant. "No." Brandon crossed his arms. Jeremy leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Why not? It's obvious that you love her and she loves you. She needs you." "No," Brandon repeated. "She can't. She needs you, not me. And I can't come. I have to stay away to protect her." Where was his flask? He needed to drink to get through this. He started rummaging in the cupboards for his alcohol. "That makes no sense," Jeremy said. "How can you protect her if you're not with her?" "Everyone I love ends up hurt or ends up dead," he yelled, angry that Jeremy kept pushing, that something was wrong with Elaine, that Claire had so easily guessed what he was thinking, that he was helpless to do anything, and that, on top of it all, he could not find any liquor in the house. The other two were startled into momentary silence. Then Claire ventured, "I'm okay." "For now," Brandon said ominously, "and you weren't." "So you really aren't going to come?" Jeremy asked. "I'm not coming," Brandon agreed, looking behind the flower bin. He heard Jeremy sigh and stand up. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but you leave me no choice." Then everything went black. Chapter 23. This new life took the strangest turns. After 5 years of dark insanity, which still gave Claire nightmares to think of, she had awoken to reality and found herself with people she did not know. They had told her Brandon would come for her any day. He hadn't come, though. Hadn't come for weeks. Brandon was so different than before. Much more private and unresponsive. Claire worried about how much he drank, but decided he probably had lived through as many horrors as she had these past years, only his were real. So she decided to give him time to heal, to adjust back to good life. Then it turned out Brandon knew the Queen. A stranger showed up claiming her brother was needed at the castle and kidnapped him when he refused to go. And now Claire was sitting in the back of a wagon holding a pack of snow to the welts on her unconscious brother's head, en route to the castle. "How's he doing?" Jeremy, that was the stranger's name, asked from the wagon seat where he was driving. Brandon stirred and groaned, though his eyes stayed closed. "I think he's waking," Claire answered. "Here." Jeremy gestured for him to join him. "Take the reins for a minute. I want to tie him up so he can't run away." Claire clambered into the seat and carefully took the reins from Jeremy. "What do I do?" she asked, feeling 8 years old again. Jeremy smiled at her. "Just hold it like that. They'll be fine," he answered, jumping into the wagon bed. Claire focused on holding the reins like that with all her might until a commotion behind her drew her concentration. Brandon was awake and writhing in the ropes that bound him. "Curse you, Jeremy," he exclaimed. "What do you think you're doing?" "What needs to be done," Jeremy answered, tying a rope around Brandon into the side of the wagon. "Don't even think of trying to escape." "I can't go back." Brandon began to get hysterical. "I can't. Something terrible will happen." "Jeremy?" Claire called. She thought she might be able to calm Brandon. "Yeah, you'd better deal with him," Jeremy agreed, taking the reins. "Hey, Brandon, shh," Claire comforted him. "Hey, listen to me, okay?" It scared her to see her big brother falling apart like this. "Claire, help me," Brandon begged, his deep voice trembling, tears running down his face. She felt terrible that he couldn't even dry his tears, so she knelt beside him and dried them with her sleeve. "Brandon, listen to me," Claire ordered. "You can't blame yourself for everything that's gone wrong. The bad things that happened to our family were because of King Eric, not because of you. And Jeremy told me about the Queen breathing the poison... Yeah, Jeremy told me about the Queen breathing the poison fog. That was the King's fault, too. If anything, blame yourself for me still being here and for the Queen regaining her mind so she could save our country. In a way, you're pretty much responsible for every good thing that's happened to us recently." "No," Brandon argued, and rolled over so he could ignore her. Claire decided to give him time to cool down, so she sat down next to him and started knitting and humming a song. When it was dark, Jeremy found a hamlet and an inn. "Here's how things are going to work," he told Brandon. "I'm going to untie you until we get into our room, then you'll be tied back up. Do you still have a headache? Good. Then you'll know I mean it when I say if you try to escape, you'll regret it. That bump on your head was me being nice." "How did you get like this?" Brandon wondered, groaning as he moved his cramped muscles. "Some stupid guy broke my best friend's heart," Jeremy replied, untying the ropes. "A man has to do what he has to do." Claire followed uncertainly as they went into the inn. Jeremy got them a room and herded Brandon forward, though her brother did little to resist him. Even though Claire was awed by Jeremy, and had been ever since he had knocked her brother unconscious, she was pretty sure Brandon could easily overpower him, concussion and all. Perhaps he had changed his mind about refusing to come with them. After Jeremy tied Brandon up again in their room, which was tidy and tiny, he went downstairs to take care of the horses and to find some food for them. Claire listened to his footsteps fade down the hall. To her surprise, Brandon spoke when Jeremy was gone. "Claire, I'm sorry for being a terrible brother today," he said. She sank down and sat against the wall next to him. "I forgive you," she said, leaning her head against his strong shoulder. "You're going through a lot right now. You have gone through a lot." "So have you," he pointed out. She nodded. "Yes, but what I went through was all in my mind. The visions will fade with time, and this feels so much more real than that felt. For you, though, every memory actually happened." They sat in familial silence for a while. Claire was close to falling asleep. The day had been long and full, and she was wonderfully tired. "Claire, are you awake?" Brandon asked a while later, twisting his head to look down at her. "Mm-hmm," she answered, rubbing her eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you said earlier, in the wagon. I guess you were right about things not being my fault. Thank you." She smiled and looked up at him with adoration. "That's what family is for, big brother." "When did you get so wise?" He looked like he wanted to ruffle her hair or pull her braid like he used to do. "I'm supposed to be the one giving you advice." Claire's smile turned a bit smug. "Maybe I've always been wise, but you were too foolish to know it." It was good to have her brother back in his normal self. Brandon laughed and changed the subject. "Do you know where we are? I couldn't see any signs from inside the wagon." "I think it's called Loomsworth," Claire said. Brandon looked frightened and eager at the same time. "Loomsworth," he repeated. "Then I'll see her tomorrow." Chapter 24. Sarah sat in the Queen's darkened bedchamber, darkened not because the curtains were drawn, but because the sun was hardly shining any more. Since Mr. Founder had left 8 months before, and then Mr. Jeremy had left 1 month later, the Queen had grown gradually weaker. But it was Prince Rhet's visit 2 days ago that broke her. It was Sarah who had found her lying on the castle steps. Since she ran to get help, Sarah had not left her sovereign's side. The whole time the Queen had been asleep in her bed. The best physicians came to examine her and tried to wake her up, but none had any success. To the contrary, Queen Elaine seemed to be slipping ever deeper into sleep. Outside, the land was cold and dark. The local citizens had gathered in a ring around the castle, holding silent vigil for their queen. Some held candles as signs of hope that none of them really felt. Sarah wandered over to peer out the window at them. The royal physician was examining the Queen at the moment. She was anxious, awaiting his reports. There was a disturbance in the crowd. Someone, or actually it looked like 3 people, was cutting through the assembly like a stick pulled across still water. They did not stop at a respectable distance from the castle like everyone else, but continued forward to the castle doors, and, she supposed, through them. When they left the crowd behind, she felt hope for the first time since the physicians had failed to awaken the Queen. She was sure she recognized 2 of them as the hunter and the valet's son, the Queen's closest friends. Surely they, of all people, could save the Queen. The chamber doors flew open. "Where is she?" the hunter, Mr. Founder, demanded, several feet ahead of Mr. Jeremy and a girl Sarah did not recognize. No one needed to answer, because his eyes instantly landed upon the sleeping Queen. Mr. Founder came up short before he bounded across the room. "Elaine!" he cried out, taking the Queen's hand and brushing a hand over her hair. The physician touched his shoulder, trying to draw him back. Brandon looked up at him with pleading in his eyes that Sarah could see from across the room. "Why is she so cold? Why doesn't she wake up?" he begged to know. Sarah was afraid again before the physician spoke. The Queen had been asleep for a while, that was nothing new, but she was not supposed to be cold. "Son," the physician began, trying again unsuccessfully to draw him away from the bed. He apparently decided it was to no avail, and sighed. "I'm sorry. You're too late." "Too late?" Mr. Jeremy asked from behind them, consternation in his face and voice. "I'm sorry," the physician explained. "The Queen is no longer with us. She died just a moment ago." Chapter 25. Elaine was dead. Nothing existed but him and her empty shell. Brandon sank to his knees, unable to stand. To her cold, still hand he clung. If he let go, he might drown in air or darkness. "Elaine," he choked on her name. "Elaine," he repeated. "Elaine, Elaine, Elaine." Each time he said her name, it came out increasingly as a call. Desperation built up inside him. "Elaine, if you can hear me where you are, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left you. I am a coward. Can you forgive me?" "No, you can't, because you're dead." He didn't know if he was laughing or crying. "You're dead, and this time maybe it really is my fault." He was definitely crying now. He could barely understand what he was saying. "I'm not ready to let you go. But I have to. I have to say goodbye to you alone when we should be saying hello together. But you are in a good place now, where you'll never be sad again." Brandon stood up shakily and looked at her for a moment without time. In that moment, he relived their short past and lived what could have been. Then he knew it was time to say goodbye. He leaned over her slowly, lovingly stroking her hair. "Farewell," he whispered, and he kissed her forehead, and some of his tears fell on her pale cheeks. Then he turned around, ready to walk away without looking back. But a weak voice behind him whispered his name. He froze, wondering if it was only his imagination. "Brandon?" the sweet voice repeated, stronger. He turned around, incredulous. It was her, really her. Elaine was awake, alive. Light burst forth, or maybe it was only him. It was the brightest, purest joy Brandon had ever known. He was about to explode. He did not know what to do, so he did the one thing he did not need to think about. "Elaine," Brandon said with all the emotion inside of him. He dropped to his knees by Elaine's bed, grasped her warm hand, and cradled it against his forehead. "You came back," Elaine said with awe. "Yes," Brandon said, and for once let his heart speak without filtering it through his brain. His brain was too overpowered to let him do so anyways. "Marry me, Elaine," he begged. "I'm never leaving you again." Her face glowed as she gazed back at him. "Yes, please, right away." As soon as the Queen had fully recovered her strength, Elaine and Brandon were wed before the entire country. Together their hearts were stronger and purer than any of the kings and queens before them, and Clachan flourished like never before. Very soon Trixtan did attack, as Prince Rhett had promised. Their army did not make it 5 feet past the border into Clachan. Some say a whirlwind came and carried them away. Some say the trees and bushes wrapped around them and squeezed them into dust. Some say the ground turned to liquid and swallowed them whole. Perhaps all of these things happened. After that, no one dared attack Clachan for generations upon generations. King Brandon and Queen Elaine ruled for many happy and thriving years. They had many children and taught them to love and protect their people. In the end, the Queen and King lay down to sleep together and passed together into whatever realm follows this one. And the magician's blessing to the first weavers continued, and continues, in the small land of Clachan. The end. So while we were reading, E.B. Dawson said, "Poor Brandon," and sent a crying face. Yeah, I agree. Poor Brandon. But yay! Elaine is alive, and they married and had a long, happy life together. So that is the end of The Weaver's Blessing. If you liked it, please, and you're watching on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up. There are 2 more fairy tales set in the same world, though not related directly to this story. The Cangraf's Curse is about the kingdom of Poldar, where evil King Eric of Cangraf was from. And then Noemi's Dragon is set in the neighboring country of Ferngold, I believe. It's been a while since I reread it. And they are available for free on my website. So if you go to bethwangler.com, you'll have 2 free fairy tale novellas to read. Eventually, I am going to write a 4th fairy tale, Brayden's Beasts, and that when I write that, I'm going to put all 4 of them together in a fairy tale compilation. But that's not going to be for a couple years at least. Yeah, thank you for reading with me. A little bit of a rewind of what's happened recently. Last month in July, I published Ginevra the Glowing, which was the 4th Steward story, so I'm really happy to finally have gotten that to you guys. I'm currently working on Steward story number 5. I may end up changing the title, so I'm not talking much about the title yet, but I'm excited for it. And then starting currently, actually, I'm taking classes that are related to my teaching credential. So you may know that I'm a teacher, and in addition to writing, I teach students all year. As a new teacher in the state of California, I have to take some classes to get more support before I'm able to renew my credential in a couple years. So I'm doing that process this year, which means that I'll be teaching full-time and taking classes in the evening, and also still trying to finish The Steward's Apprentice and the rest of the Steward stories for you guys. Because of all of that, and because I'm expecting a really busy year this next year, I'm cutting back on a lot of things that I've been doing. Unfortunately, that means that I'm not anticipating being able to do regular story times through the rest of the year. There might be a couple times where on holiday weekends or something I'm able to do a special story time. So what I'm planning with that is that if that does happen, I'll make as much of a noise about it as I can so you guys hear about it, and then I'll read one of my short stories. So it'll be contained in that one video. But then hopefully we will be able to pick back up with story times when the school year ends. And in the meantime, I'm going to be doing all I can to get The Steward's Apprentice and the rest of the Steward stories to you as fast as possible. So yeah, thank you for reading with me. Let me know what you thought of the story. If you enjoyed it, if you had a favorite character, if you have a favorite moment in the story, and have a wonderful rest of your August. Bye!